At Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, my son-in-law's father grabbed my 7-year-old granddaughter by the arm and shoved her so hard into the bookshelf behind her chair that it split her eyebrow open. My daughter-in-law's mother didn't even get up from her seat. She just reached for the cranberry sauce and said, "Good, maybe now she'll stop being so clumsy." My granddaughter didn't scream. That's the part that still wakes me up some nights. She just went quiet and pressed her little hand against her forehead and stared at the blood on her fingers like she was trying to understand what had happened to her. I stood up from my chair. I walked into the kitchen and I made one phone call. They thought I was just a tired old man with a bad hip and a paid-off Toyota. They had no idea who they were sitting across from. Before I get into what happened after that phone call, if you're the kind of person who believes quiet people are usually the ones worth listening to, hit subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them. My name is Walter Kessler. I'm 71 years old. For 33 years, I worked as a senior fraud investigator for my state's Department of Consumer Protection, Construction and Real Estate Division. I spent my career chasing contractors who took deposits and vanished, landlords who falsified inspection records, and developers who built on land they knew wasn't safe. I retired 6 years ago with a commendation from the Attorney General's office and a Rolodex. Yes, an actual paper Rolodex I never modernized, full of names who still return my calls, but to my son Daniel, to his wife Vanessa, and especially to her parents, Roland and Diane Ashworth, I was just Walter. The quiet man who used to do something with permits, the one who wore the same brown cardigan to every holiday and drove a 12-year-old Camry. I hadn't seen my granddaughter, Mia, in almost 4 months when the invitation came. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and I was in my garage, sanding down an old birdhouse when my phone buzzed. The text was from Vanessa, not from Daniel. "Thanksgiving at our place, 3 p.m. Mia's been asking about you." That was the whole message. No warmth in it, just information, the way you'd confirm a delivery window. But Mia had been asking about me. I stood there in the cold garage and felt something tighten in my chest that I hadn't let myself feel in months. Mia is my only grandchild. Her birthday had come and gone in August, and I hadn't been invited to the party. I'd mailed her a card with 2 $20 bills folded inside, and a drawing I'd made myself of a birdhouse. Because the last time I'd seen her back in the spring, she told me she wanted to build one with me someday. The card came back 3 weeks later, stamped "Return to sender" in Vanessa's handwriting. I never told Daniel. Some things you carry alone, so your son doesn't have to carry them too. I texted back, "I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" She didn't answer. Thanksgiving morning was cold and clear, the kind of sky that looks like it's been scrubbed. I drove the 35 minutes to Daniel and Vanessa's place in the newer part of town. One of those developments where every house looks like it was designed by the same tired committee. Stone veneer. 3-car garage, a lawn too green for November. I knew the neighborhood because I knew who built it. Roland Ashworth, Vanessa's father, owned Ashworth Properties, high-end residential developments and property management, 4 locations across 2 counties. He'd like to remind people of all 4. I parked at the curb because the driveway was already full. Vanessa's Audi, Daniel's old Ford pickup, Roland's brand new Range Rover, and Diane's white Lexus. I sat in my Camry for a second, looking at all that polished chrome, and I almost laughed. Because 26 years ago, I'd helped shut down a developer who drove cars exactly like Roland's, paid for with money skimmed from homeowner escrow accounts. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Vanessa opened the door, wearing an apron over a cream sweater, and she gave me a smile that never made it up to her eyes. "Oh, you're early. I was 4 minutes early." "I can wait in the car," I said. No, come in. Take your shoes off." The house smelled like sage and expensive candles. I padded into the living room in my socks, and there was Mia, sitting cross-legged on the rug with a coloring book. The second she saw me, her whole face lit up like a struck match. She dropped her crayon and ran across the room and wrapped her arms around my legs. "Grandpa! You came. I knelt down, my knees complaining the whole way, and pulled her in close. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and crayon wax. She was smaller than I remembered, thinner in the shoulders, her hair cut shorter than she used to wear it. There was a faint yellow-green bruise on her upper arm, the kind that's a couple weeks old. Of course I came, sweetheart. Of course I came. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. My son, 34 years old, tall like his mother was, but standing like a man who was always apologizing for the space he took up. His shoulders had a curve to them now that hadn't been there 2 Christmases ago. He gave me a small wave. "Hey, Dad. Hey, son." That was all we got out before Roland Ashworth walked into the room, a tumbler of scotch in hand at 2 in the afternoon. His face flushed with either the drink or the pride, and I've never been able to tell those two apart on a man like him. Well, Roland said, looking me up and down. "Look who showed up. Daniel, get your father a drink. He looks like he needs one. I'm fine." "Thank you," I said. Roland dropped into the good armchair, the one Daniel had bought when he and Vanessa first moved, and looked at me the way you look at something you've already decided isn't worth much, so you're fully retired now. What was it again? Building permits? Paperwork? Fraud investigation, I said. For the state. He drew out a laugh like the word itself was funny to him. "Paper pusher. Somebody's got to do it, I guess." He turned to his wife, Diane, who'd just come down the stairs, small and sharp-eyed, twisting a strand of pearls between 2 fingers. "Me? I built something. 4 locations. 200 units under management. You ever wonder what that feels like, Daniel? Building something real?" Daniel stared at the floor. "Dinner's ready," Vanessa called from the kitchen too brightly, like she hadn't heard a word of it. We sat down. Mia was placed between her mother and her grandmother, Diane. I was given the seat closest to the door. Roland sat at the head of the table like it was carved for him. And that's where things started, quietly, the way these things always start. Small comments, small cruelties, building towards something none of us saw coming until it had already happened. Dinner started the way it always did at that house. Good food, bad air. Vanessa had made a turkey, a real one, glazed and photographed for her phone before anyone was allowed to touch it. Roland spent the first 10 minutes telling Daniel how he could be making 3 times his warehouse salary if he grew a spine and came to work in sales. Daniel said maybe in the smallest voice a grown man can use. Diane laughed at everything Roland said, right on cue, the way a woman laughs when she learned decades ago that disagreement in that house cost more than it was worth. I kept eating. I kept watching. That's most of what I did for 33 years, sit quietly and watch people who thought nobody important was paying attention. Mia was swinging her feet under the table, the way 7-year-olds do, humming something to herself. She reached for the gravy boat to pass it to me, and her hand slipped. Not much, just enough that a few drops splashed onto the white tablecloth in front of Roland's plate. The room went very still. I've seen that kind of stillness before in interview rooms, right before someone tells you the truth they've been holding back. Mia. Roland's voice had changed completely. "What did I tell you about being careful at this table?" "Sorry, Grandpa Roland. I'm sorry." Her voice was already shaking. "Sorry doesn't fix a $200 tablecloth." He stood up. "Come here." "She didn't mean it," Daniel said. And there was the smallest crack of resistance in his voice. Gone almost as fast as it appeared. "I'm talking to my granddaughter." "Daniel, Mia, come here." Mia looked at her mother. Vanessa looked at her plate. Mia slid down out of her chair and walked around the table with her shoulders already climbing toward her ears. The way a kid walks when she's learned. Somewhere along the way, that walking slowly doesn't help, and walking fast doesn't help either. That there's no safe speed for this at all. What happened next took about 4 seconds. Roland grabbed her by the upper arm, not gently, and shoved her, hard with his whole shoulder behind it, back toward her chair. She stumbled, lost her footing on the rug. and went sideways into the bookshelf against the wall. Her head caught the corner of the middle shelf on the way down. There was a crack of wood and books hitting the floor, and then a high, thin sound coming out of her that wasn't quite crying yet, because I don't think she understood yet what had happened to her. Then the crying started, the real kind, where a child's whole body shakes and they can't get a full breath in between sobs. Blood was running down from a split just above her eyebrow, dripping onto her collar. Diane didn't get up. She reached for the cranberry sauce, spooned some onto her plate and said, "Good, maybe now she'll learn to be careful." Vanessa said, "Mom," not a protest, barely even a comment. Daniel was halfway out of his chair. His face had gone white. He looked at his wife. He looked at Roland. He looked at his daughter, bleeding on the floor by the broken bookshelf. And then, God help him, and he sat back down. He picked his fork back up, like his body needed something to do with its hands. I have replayed that 4 seconds more times than I can count. I don't blame my son for freezing. I understand now what years in that house had worn down in him. But in that moment, the only thing keeping me in my own chair was a cold. Clear thought, if I moved wrong, if I said the wrong thing, Mia would pay for it later, when I wasn't there to see it. So I set my fork down. I folded my napkin, and I said very calmly, "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." Roland waved a hand at me without looking over, already settling back into his chair like a king resuming his throne. "Down the hall, old-timer. Try not to get lost." I walked down the hall. I went into the bathroom. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and took out my phone. I called a number I hadn't dialed in almost 3 years. Metro PD. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Alvarez. Nina, it's Walter Kessler." There was a half-second pause, and then her voice changed completely. "Walter, that you? I need a unit at 214 Larkspur Court. I'm a witness to the felony assault of a minor. The child is 7 years old. The perpetrator is an adult male, mid-60s, intoxicated. He grabbed the child by the arm and shoved her into a piece of furniture hard enough to split her scalp open. She's bleeding from a head laceration, and she needs to be seen by paramedics. The mother and grandmother are present, and neither of them intervened. I'm in the home. I'm not in danger, but the child needs medical attention. Jesus, okay, we're rolling. Address again. I gave it to her. "Walter, are you recording any of this?" "Audio only from in here. I have a clear line of sight to the dining room from the hallway. I'll get video for the rest. Stay on as long as you can. ETA is about 6 minutes. One more thing, Nina. The man's name is Roland Ashworth. He owns Ashworth Properties. I want a courtesy heads up to whoever's handling child endangerment cases this month. And if District Attorney Ferris's office is reachable, let them know this one's going to get some attention. Already texting it in." I hung up. I splashed water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror, an old man with thinning grey hair and tired eyes. And I thought, "I'm sorry, Mia. I'm so sorry I let it get this far before I acted." Then I opened my phone camera, started recording, and walked back out to the dining room with the phone held low at my hip. Mia was back in her chair. Her eyes were red and swollen. A paper towel pressed clumsily to her forehead by her own small hand, already soaked through. Nobody else had gotten her a fresh one. She was eating a spoonful of mashed potatoes anyway, mechanically, the way you learn to eat when you figured out that finishing your plate is the price of being left alone. "Everything come out all right?" Roland said, and actually laughed at his own joke. "Everything's fine," I said. I sat down. I picked my fork back up. I kept the phone recording, angled just enough to catch the table, the blood, the bookshelf with its broken shelf lip hanging loose. 6 minutes is a very long time to sit at a table with a bleeding child and pretend nothing has happened. I have never counted seconds as slowly as I counted them that afternoon. Then the doorbell rang. Vanessa frowned. "We're not expecting anyone. Probably kids selling something," Roland muttered. "Tell them to get lost." She got up, smoothing her apron, and walked to the door. I heard it open. I heard her sharp intake of breath. And then a man's voice, calm and procedural. "Ma'am, we're with Metro Police. We received a report of an injured minor at this address. We need to come in. This is a family dinner. There's nothing. Ma'am, please step aside." Two uniformed officers came through the entryway, and behind them, a plainclothes detective I recognized immediately, Sergeant Dale Whitfield. Mid-50s now, grey coming in at his temples. 22 years ago, he'd been a rookie patrol officer I'd worked alongside on a construction fraud case that put a slumlord behind bars. Behind him was a paramedic with a jump bag. Roland half rose from his chair. "What in the hell is this?" Dale walked into the dining room, his eyes sweeping the table, landing on Mia and the blood-soaked paper towel at her forehead. His jaw tightened. "Hi, sweetheart," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "I'm Dale. I'm a police officer. My friend here is going to take a look at that cut, okay? You did nothing wrong." The paramedic knelt beside her. Mia looked at her mother. For the first time all afternoon, Vanessa looked frightened. "This is harassment," Roland boomed. "This is private property. You can't just—" "Sir, please sit down," the first officer said. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Dale stood back up slowly. He looked at Roland. Then he looked at me, and something passed between us. A small nod, and on his face, something that looked a lot like relief. The kind of look a young officer gives a mentor who's just walked back into the room after years away. "Mr. Ashworth," Dale said evenly, "we're here because a witness in this home reported a felony assault on a minor. I need you to stay seated." "Witness? What witness?" Dale turned to me. "Mr. Kessler, can you confirm what you reported by phone?" I set my fork down. I wiped my mouth with my napkin. I looked across the table at Roland Ashworth, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself stop hiding what I actually am. "My name is Walter Kessler," I said. "I'm Mia's grandfather. Approximately 11 minutes ago in this room, I personally witnessed Mr. Ashworth grab my granddaughter by the arm and shove her into that bookshelf." I pointed. The broken shelf lip was still hanging loose against the wall. She struck her head on the corner. She's had an active laceration bleeding for over 10 minutes without medical attention. Mrs. Ashworth verbally endorsed the act afterward. "I have video of everything that happened after I re-entered the room." Roland's face went from red to a strange, waxy grey. You called the cops at my daughter's dinner. You assaulted a child at my granddaughter's dinner," I said. "The cops were a formality. And who the hell are you to walk in here and take his word over mine?" "Some retired paper pusher." Dale's jaw set. "Mr. Ashworth, this man is Walter Kessler. He spent 33 years as a senior fraud investigator for this state's Department of Consumer Protection. He trained half the financial crimes unit I've worked with, myself included, back when I was 24 years old. When he calls me and tells me what he just saw, I believe him before he finishes his first sentence." The room went very quiet. Vanessa was staring at me like she'd never actually seen me before. Diane had stopped touching her pearls. Daniel was looking at me with his mouth slightly open, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. It looked like a boy waking up from a long sleep. The paramedic looked up. "This laceration's going to need stitches, and I want to rule out a concussion. She took the impact right at the hairline. I'd like to get her to the ER. She's fine," Vanessa snapped. "She doesn't need a hospital. She just—" "Ma'am," Dale said with real patience, "that decision isn't yours alone right now. Her father's here." Daniel stood up slowly, his hands flat on the table like he was steadying himself against something moving under his feet. "Take her," he said, his voice cracking. "Take my daughter to the hospital. I'm riding with her." "Daniel," Vanessa's voice cracked too, for very different reasons. "Don't you dare!" "You laughed, Vanessa." He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. "Your father threw our daughter into a bookshelf, and your mother reached for the cranberry sauce. And you said Mom like she'd made a rude comment at brunch." The paramedic gathered Mia up carefully, wrapped a foil blanket around her small shoulders, and walked her toward the door. As she passed me, she reached out one hand and touched mine. "Grandpa," she whispered. Are you coming? I'll be right behind you, sweetheart. I promise. Roland Ashworth was arrested in his daughter's dining room at 4:52 p.m. on Thanksgiving. He was charged with felony child endangerment and third-degree assault. They cuffed him with his napkin still tucked into his collar. Diane wasn't arrested that night, but she was given a very direct explanation of mandatory reporting laws and told to expect a follow-up call from Child Protective Services. I drove straight to the hospital and sat in the waiting room with my son. Mia needed 6 stitches and had a mild concussion, nothing permanent. The doctor said, but it could easily have gone worse with a slightly different angle, a slightly harder shove. When the doctor told us that, Daniel put his head in his hands and made a sound I had never heard a grown man make before. I put my arm around his shoulders. He was shaking. "Dad," he said into his hands. "Dad, who are you?" I sat there in the plastic chair, thinking about how to answer. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. "I'm your father," I finally said. "That's what I am. Everything else was just a job I used to do. Sergeant Whitfield said you trained him, that you spent 30 years chasing fraud." "That's true. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let Roland call you a paper pusher for years and never say a word?" I thought about how to answer that one carefully because it mattered. Because, Daniel, people show you exactly who they are once they think you don't matter enough to hide it from. Roland's been showing me who he is for 6 years. Every single time, I filed it away. I wasn't hiding from him. I was building a record. I just didn't know it would take this long to need it. He was quiet a long time. "Then, Dad, I have to ask you something. Anything. Vanessa. The way she just," said Mom, like nothing happened. "I don't think I can unhear that." "I know. What do I do?" I took a breath. "Son, that's not mine to decide. But the state's going to file charges against Roland. CPS is going to open a case file. You and Vanessa are both going to be looked at very closely in the weeks ahead, and you need to decide right now whose side you're on, hers or your daughter's, because after tonight, you cannot be on both." He looked toward the doors of the pediatric ward for a long moment. "Hers," he finally said. "I mean, Mia's, always Mia's. From now on, we start there." The next morning, I called a family law attorney named Renata Osei. She'd spent 18 years as a deputy in the state attorney general's office before going into private custody and family law because, as she once told me, "I'm tired of prosecuting cartels. Now I just want to ruin custody cases for bad people." Renata is 5'0" and the single most terrifying litigator I have ever watched in a courtroom. "Walter," she said, "when I finish telling her what happened, I will eat that family for breakfast. Send me the police report and the medical records by Monday." Then I called an old colleague, Marcus Delaney, who had spent 22 years auditing residential developers and property management firms for the state. "Marcus, how busy are you?" "For you. Never too busy." "What have you got?" "Ashworth Properties. 4 locations. Owner's name is Roland Ashworth. I want to know if the books are clean." A long pause. "Walter, are we doing what I think we're doing?" "Marcus, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking a colleague of 20-some years whether in his professional judgment a particular company might have irregularities worth a concerned citizen's attention." He laughed. "You haven't lost a step. Give me 4 days. Take a week." "I'm not in a hurry." I wasn't in a hurry because 33 years in this line of work teaches you something simple. Men who shove children into bookshelves do not, as a rule, run clean businesses. Men who need to dominate a dinner table do not file honest quarterly disclosures. There's a tax on being a bully, and eventually the regulators come to collect it. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Mia came home from the hospital with 6 stitches and a butterfly bandage above her eyebrow. She was going to be fine physically. She came home to my house because Daniel was staying with me now, having packed a bag the night of the incident and never gone back. Vanessa had refused to leave the Larkspur courthouse, and this told me everything. She had also not once visited her daughter in the hospital. She'd hired an attorney named Corbin, out of the city, who was already drafting motions about parental interference. Corbin didn't yet know he was about to be introduced to Renata Ose. The first week home, Mia barely spoke. She sat on my couch with my old beagle Chester and stared at cartoons without laughing. She flinched at raised voices from the television. She had nightmares most nights and would climb into Daniel's bed around 3 in the morning without a word. I bought her a little toolbox, real tools sized for small hands, and set it in the corner of the living room where she could see it every day. I told her that as soon as the doctor cleared her, we'd finally build that birdhouse. The first time I saw her really smile again was the night she asked me, "Grandpa, were you like a spy or something?" "No, sweetheart. I was an investigator. I looked at numbers and papers and figured out when people were lying." "That's boring, very boring," I said. "That's exactly why bad guys think nobody's paying attention." She thought about that for a while, chewing her lip the way her father does. Then she said very seriously, "I think I want to catch bad guys with numbers too, when I'm big." I laughed so hard I nearly cried. 2.5 weeks after that, Marcus called me back. "Walter, sit down." I'm sitting. Ashworth Properties has been running a maintenance billing scheme across all 4 properties for at least 5 years. They're charging tenants and HOAs for capital repairs and inspections that were never performed, falsified invoices, forged contractor sign-offs, the whole apparatus. We're talking north of $2 million in fraudulent billing. There's also a pattern of commingled escrow funds that's a straight-up violation of trust account law. And I'd bet real money there's wire fraud in how the fake invoices get processed. That's beautiful, Marcus. There's more. The shell vendor company that supposedly does all this maintenance work? Registered agent on the LLC is Diane Ashworth. She's not just aware of it. She's a co-signer on every fraudulent invoice for the last 3 years. I took a slow breath. "Marcus, I think a concerned citizen, perhaps an anonymous one, might want to file a formal tip with the state's fraud division, and maybe a parallel complaint with the licensing board that oversees property managers." "Walter, you magnificent old bastard, I'm just a retired man with a paid-off Camry." "Sure you are. I'll have the documentation ready by Friday." I hung up and sat on my back porch in the cold December air. Jester came and put his head on my knee. Inside, I could hear Mia laughing at something on TV, a real laugh this time, loud and unguarded, while Daniel talked on the phone with Renata about emergency custody motions. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't gleeful that day. I have never once in 33 years enjoyed this part of the work. What I felt was something colder and steadier than satisfaction. The way you feel when you finally fix a leak that's been dripping in the ceiling for months. You don't celebrate. You just stop hearing the drip. The criminal case against Roland moved fast because the evidence was overwhelming. My video, the medical records, the responding officer's photos of the broken bookshelf, and Mia's eventual recorded interview with a child forensic specialist, conducted so gently that Daniel cried in the waiting room the whole time. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, Roland Ashworth received a registered letter informing him that Ashworth Properties was under formal investigation for billing fraud. 4 days later, the state licensing board suspended his property management license across all 4 locations pending review. Within a week of that, his lender pulled his development financing. Because license suspension voided every loan covenant tied to it, in the span of about 10 days, a man who was out on bail awaiting a criminal assault trial watched his entire business empire freeze solid around him. He called Daniel screaming that, "Your damn father did this to me." Daniel very quietly said, "I don't think he did anything, Roland." "I think you did," and hung up. Vanessa filed for divorce in mid-December, clearly expecting Daniel to fold and hand her the house and full custody without a fight. Instead, she got Renata Ose, who filed a counterpetition that same afternoon with 31 exhibits attached: the medical records, the police report, the CPS findings, and sworn statements from 2 neighbors describing a pattern of yelling and slammed doors going back years. By late January, Daniel had emergency temporary custody. By March, he had full custody, with supervised visitation only for Vanessa, contingent on completing a court-ordered family counseling program. She did not complete it. It turned out Vanessa had never learned how to be anything other than the smallest person in a room built by her father. And without that room, she didn't know how to stand at all. The criminal trial of Roland Ashworth began the following March. Daniel didn't attend. He stayed home with Mia. I went every day. I sat in the 3rd row behind the prosecutor's table in a blue suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Roland saw me on the first day and looked away. He never looked at me again for the rest of the trial. Diane took a separate plea deal on the financial fraud charges in exchange for testimony in the assault case. On the stand, she described her husband as having an old-fashioned disciplinary style that had, in her words, gotten out of hand that particular day. It was a carefully rehearsed kind of regret. She was lying about most of it. It didn't matter. The video did the rest of the work. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a measured woman named Harriet Colby, gave Roland Ashworth 4 years in state prison, with a mandatory minimum of 2 before parole eligibility. Before sentencing, she looked at him over her glasses and said something I will remember for the rest of my life. Mr. Ashworth, this court sees many kinds of harm. Most involve adults in conflict with each other, and those cases are often tragedies of circumstance. This is different. This case involves a grown man, 3 times the size and many times the strength of a 7-year-old child, physically throwing that child into furniture over a spilled spoonful of gravy, and then sitting back down to finish his meal while she bled. This court finds your conduct not merely criminal, but contemptible. The maximum available sentence feels insufficient. It is, however, what the law provides. Roland was led out in handcuffs. He didn't look at anyone. Outside the courtroom, the assistant district attorney who'd handled the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Priya Chandran, shook my hand. Mr. Kessler, it was an honor working alongside your testimony. The honor was mine, counselor. You did the actual work. I just made a phone call. You did a lot more than that. Sir, I drove home that evening, and Mia was waiting on the front porch with Chester. Out of her stitches for weeks by then, the little scar above her eyebrow already fading pale. She ran down the steps when I got out of the car. Grandpa, what happened? I picked her up. My back complained about it. I didn't care. He's going away for a long time, sweetheart. He's not going to hurt anyone for a long, long time. Forever? Long enough. Long enough that by the time he's out you'll be tall enough he wouldn't dare try. She thought about that seriously, the way she thinks about most things now. Grandpa, can we build the birdhouse now? Yes, sweetheart. Now we build the birdhouse. We built it that weekend in my garage, and it came out crooked and a little lopsided, and she was prouder of it than anything I've ever seen a person be proud of. It's still hanging in my backyard oak tree. A pair of wrens moved into it that spring. In April, Vanessa showed up at my house unannounced. She was thinner. Something in her had gone quiet in a different way than before. Not the fear quiet of the old house, something closer to grief. Walter, she said. Can I come in? No, I said. Daniel and Mia aren't here. They're at her soccer practice. Can I say something to you then? I looked at her a long moment. I thought about the return to sender card. I thought about her saying Mom like a shrug instead of a scream. You can say what you came to say. I'll listen. I'm not promising anything past that, she cried. She told me she'd grown up terrified of her father, had spent her whole life trying to earn a kind of love he never actually knew how to give, and that somewhere along the way she'd started needing Daniel to be small, because if he was small, that meant her father's kind of big was still the only kind of strength that counted. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said, Vanessa, I believe you mean at least some of that. But you are not owed my forgiveness, and you are absolutely not owed access to my granddaughter. If you want a relationship with her, you will earn it exactly the way the court laid out, supervised visit by supervised visit, with real counseling over real time. You don't apologize your way back in. You walk your way back in, and the walk takes years and it might not work at all, she nodded, wiping her face. At the bottom of the porch steps she stopped and turned back. Walter, did you do the thing with the licensing board? My father's business. I looked at her. Your father committed years of documented fraud. The state noticed on its own. That has nothing to do with me. She stared a long moment, then nodded slowly and drove away. I never told her the truth. I'll tell you the truth, though. I made 2 phone calls. That's all it ever was. 2 calls to 2 old colleagues, telling them exactly what I'd personally witnessed, and asking what, in their professional judgment, a concerned citizen ought to do about it. Everything after that was simply the system doing what it's designed to do. Roland Ashworth destroyed himself. I just made sure the right people were watching when he did it. That's the difference between revenge and justice, if you're wondering. Revenge is a private satisfaction you chase with your own 2 hands. Justice is a public reckoning that doesn't need your hands at all. It only needs you to stop looking away. I'm 71 years old. I still live in the same house I've had for 31 years. I still drive a paid-off Camry that's older than some of the interns I used to train. Mia lives with Daniel and me most of the year now because the school here is better and because, in her words, Grandpa's backyard has the good tree. She's 9 now. 18 months have passed since that Thanksgiving. She sleeps through the night. She laughs loud enough to startle Chester off the couch. She has a best friend named Ruthie, and they build things in my garage on Saturdays. Because Mia asked her father if she could take a woodworking class instead of dance. And her father said yes, without a moment's hesitation. Some evenings, after Mia's asleep, Daniel and I sit on the back porch and don't say much of anything. We just listen to the crickets. One night last fall, he reached over, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Dad, thank you. For all the years you didn't tell me, and for the night you finally did." I didn't say anything back. I just put my hand over his. People are going to look at you your whole life and decide who you are based on the car you drive, the sweater you wear, how loud you talk at dinner. Let them be wrong about you. The people who actually matter will figure out the truth eventually. And the people who never do were never worth explaining yourself to in the first place. I'm the quiet man in the paid-off. Camry, I'm also the man who made the call. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I'm genuinely grateful. Hit like if it meant something to you tonight. Subscribe so the next story finds you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you want, tell me about the quiet person in your own family that nobody ever quite saw coming. I read every single comment. Take care of each other out there, especially the small ones.